Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Jesse Bollinger. I am an AmeriCorps Vista member serving with the Decatur County Development Corporation. And in this presentation today, I want to talk about a couple of really important factors for really anybody in the nonprofit sector, but especially those that are in national service and for those specifically serving as an AmeriCorps member, state or national AmeriCorps or AmeriCorps Vista. Uh, and definitely want to give credit to the national service programs in Decatur County, Iowa, the Graceland University AmeriCorps State Program, the AmeriCorps Vistas serving in Iowa as a whole, as I'm the only one in Decatur County. I want to recognize those statewide as a VISTA, and then the Retired Senior Volunteer Program sponsored by Graceland University. So we're going to talk about citizenship and then a little bit about volunteer management. I want to share with you some of my thoughts and feelings about volunteer management that have come through my research during my career. So, first of all, I think it's really important to talk about what citizenship really is. And citizenship's really a simple concept. It's essentially the position or status of being a citizen. And to me, in my mind, citizenship is different for every country. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a couple of minutes about what it means to really be a citizen from the standpoint of the United States. Now, I also recognize that idea of citizenship could change regionally. It could change even within a larger city, even within a larger cultural group. And so we'll kind of talk about those things. I want to introduce myself just a little bit to give you an idea of my background and some of the things that have influenced the work that I've done. In 2007, I obtained a bachelor's degree in communications from Graceland University in Lamoni, a master's in nonprofit management from Regis University in 2009, and then in 2014 my PhD in public service leadership from Capella University in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I do have a variety of professional experience. I spent 9 years in the real estate industry, both as a technology coordinator and then 6 years as a salesperson, and really valued that experience, and it taught me a lot about customer service and working with people. 2 years in higher education with Southwestern Community College and Graceland University in distance education and in the Master's of Science in Nursing program. And then 10 years in the nonprofit sector, and that's a combination of education and professional experience with a number of different organizations. So let's talk a little bit about AmeriCorps Vista, because Vista is a little different than other national service programs. Vista, Volunteers in Service to America, is a program sponsored by the Corporation for National and Community Service. And this is the same government agency that sponsors programs like AmeriCorps state and national programs, the Retired Senior Volunteer Program, Foster Grandparents, AmeriCorps NCCC, is also sponsored by the corporation. The difference with Vista is that we do not do any direct service. We only do capacity building, which basically means that we create programs, we create systems of change, and we help develop sustainability. And finally, Vistas are only found in communities with poverty issues. And it's a very unique opportunity to be able to serve as a Vista, and it's something that I would really encourage everybody to consider giving a year of service in some way, whether it's an AmeriCorps State and National or relocating as a Vista. I do serve with the Decatur County Development Corporation here in Lamoni, or in Leon rather, serve all of Decatur County. So let's talk about the aspects of citizenship. And these are real basic concepts that I think we all know, but to really think about them individually I think is important. And so the first thing is care and respect. I think as young children, we all learn that you are to, respect your elders, respect your peers, and do these things. But caring and respecting all people, regardless of, those traditionally held pieces of race, national origin, color, gender, these things. But as we'll see here, respecting other elements of the individual person is really important. And it really truly can affect your day-to-day interactions. And having that heightened level of respect you will find will improve your working relationships and your ability to improve your organization and your community as a whole. And I think as a Vista or somebody in national service, while you're tied to an organization, the overarching piece here is serving a community and nationally serving the nation, because if one community is strong, other communities can be strong. Being involved can mean different things for different people. It can mean doing different things, but being involved at a level that fits your style, your needs, your resources, your interests. But being involved at all makes a good citizen. A citizen that is not involved is not truly fulfilling their place in society to me. They're not also gaining fully, as we'll see, the information that they need to be an effective member of our society. And that goes right into, being informed and being educated, and I think the first place that this would take most people's minds is to politics, being an informed voter, being an informed citizen about local issues. But I think it goes a step further. It steps outside of politics and it goes to being informed about your community. And that could even be what's going on in your neighborhood. Do you have a neighbor that's maybe elderly that has some needs that aren't being addressed? Are there things that you, as a member of that neighborhood, as a member of that community, could be doing to improve the life of that person? And this completely transcends your role or a role that you might have, whether it be as a national service member or an employee of an organization. Step outside of those roles and say, what else can I do? What else should I be doing? And by having this information, this education, I believe you will find will make you a more effective citizen, and as we'll see later, a more effective volunteer. So we'll move on here. That the ability to disagree while listening is important, and to disagree is pretty easy. To just say, I don't agree with that. Now, the problem that I personally have with that is I can listen to somebody disagree, but there's a difference in listening to somebody disagree versus listening to somebody disagree that has listened to the full issue, and so therefore when they disagree, they can say, I disagree because. And they can do that simply because they've gone through the step of listening. And so by listening, you are doing a couple things. You're understanding the viewpoints of the other person, and you're combining that with your education and other information that you have, so your disagreement is done in an informative way, and it's done in a logical way that can be utilized as a member of that community and in that setting. Belonging. And this goes back to and all of these concepts in a lot of ways go back to very young children, preschool age, maybe even younger. When you were a young child, belonging as a group meant being able to play, being able to communicate, being able to share. But the same thing goes for adults. We all belong. We're all citizens of the United States. We are all members of the community. But to understand how you belong, and based on how you belong, how can you fulfill and how should you fulfill these other elements that we've already discussed, and how can your involvement be enhanced by the factors we're going to talk about here in a minute about volunteerism. So all of these things are important that we're talking about, the elements of citizenship, but I want the idea of belonging to kind of be central here as we move forward and talk about volunteer management here in just a second. So, giving back. And for anybody that's involved in nonprofits, anybody that's interested in volunteerism, anybody that's interested in philanthropy, giving back is important. It's kind of that central idea. But for those that aren't in those areas or as heavily involved as maybe they want to be in giving back, there are other ways to give than being a traditional volunteer or being a regular check writer to an organization or a regular tither at church. Giving back could be taking dinner to a neighbor, taking out somebody's trash that maybe has some physical challenges, sitting with somebody that's maybe shut in because of age or disability. And so find your way of giving back. All right, so I mentioned this in the beginning, but culture. So American culture, United States culture, is an idea that I think is sometimes too broad. And I do believe that we do have the kind of the traditional European background, the founding ideas of our culture. But today, with the wonderful amounts of immigration that we've had, the many different cultures that have become part of the United States, the idea of a melting pot, the ideas of what the United States cultures have definitely changed, and the idea of culture from country to country can most certainly be different. So. Cultures are made up of values rather, and the values of a culture can be anything from how your family should interact, how you should engage in the workforce, how you should present yourself in public, and on the inverse, how you should not do certain things. And so an example that I'll use that I believe is a commonly held United States value is that young children should not swear. And so if you are in the middle of a Walmart and you hear a child dropping the F-bomb, that is not, to me, a commonly held value that's okay. But now if an adult does it, it's a little more accepted. It can be offensive, certainly, but it is traditionally, in my opinion, a little more accepted. And that's just an example. Okay. Then you move to habits. And I don't feel like a great deal has been written or talked about in our culture about habits on a traditional sense. But I think it's something that internally most people understand. I will admit that my understanding of habits and my thoughts on habits it wasn't central for me until I was encouraged a couple of years ago, had the opportunity to be a part of a publication by Dr. Lance Kazaza on habits and attitudes. And when that opportunity came about, I was able to sit down and say, okay, what habits make me strong? How does that play into our culture? And so I do think that our culture has some strong habits. It could be anything from the habit of stopping at a Starbucks, the habit of shopping at big chain stores, which is something that I think has become central. But the other thing is the habits of interacting with friends, the habits of interacting with family. If you look at cultures of, I'll use the Japanese for example. The Japanese, if you're not aware, is a very long-lived culture. They are very commonly have people that live into 100 plus years, 105 years plus, sometimes even 110 years plus, and they have very strong habits. One of those being that having company, very consistently visiting the older person is common. The habit of eating very similar foods, the habit of walking certain amounts, that kind of thing. If you want a good depiction of this, I would encourage you to look at Dan Buettner, author of the Blue Zones. There's several Blue Zone books, and so look at Buettner's work, and that will talk a little more about these cultural habits. So then, as I indicated earlier, attitudes, cultural attitudes, and it goes back to my example earlier of the young child swearing. The attitude towards that is that it's negative, and I think it's easier to talk about individual attitudes, but on a national level, as a cultural level, the attitudes that I see and that I think we should think about here are how organizations should help people, how nonprofits should help people, attitudes of how volunteers interact with organizations, what organizations should do for volunteers. That's really the root of, I think, where a lot of trainings come from, is that there's a certain attitude of what should happen for volunteers or by volunteers. Our attitude towards, on a political side, there's attitudes about what our military should do, what our military should not do, for example. And I don't want to get real political here, but those are a couple of stronger examples. I want to move now into volunteer management, because to me, volunteer management's really important. It's a real passion of mine. And we're all familiar with what I will call probably traditional volunteer management. And so that's going to consist of a recruitment process. It's going to consist of a screening or interviewing process, hopefully both, the training, and then retaining, a retention process. And so typically the way that this happens is that recruitment's done. It might be done in the newspaper, it might be done via social media, it might be done at events, but somehow there's going to be a message that an organization has a certain need. And a lot of times those position descriptions describing the volunteers' duties are going to have very specific, we want this education, we want these skills. So for an example, a volunteer to run a welcome center at a YMCA, they might say good phone skills, basic computer skills, knowledge of Microsoft Word, friendly, so on and so forth. Then you would move into the screening process. They would fill out an application. They would probably have an interview. The application would ask them if they have these skills and these abilities. Then we move into training. and we'll talk more about that, and that's going to differ from organization to organization, but there are some basic ideas surrounding that. And then retaining, and we'll talk about ways to retain. So let's talk a little bit about recruitment. So we have the traditional recruitment methods, and that's what I talked about a second ago, where you've got your newspaper ads, your social media, your messages at events, posters, that kind of thing. And those recruitment methods are going to focus on the needs of that position and the idea of we're looking for skills. That's what we're looking at. And yes, we're going to ask about education. We're going to ask about work experience. We're going to ask about past volunteerism. But the heart of traditional volunteer recruitment is we need a certain skill. Do you have it? And I'm not sure that's the right way to do things. And over the past couple of years, I've been looking into it. And so I think there are some new ideas. There's a new way to do things here. And so the way I'm going to propose that is looking at three really specific components. And those are education, work experience, and mental health. And I want to break these down separately. Education is formal, your primary schooling, pre-K through 12th grade, college or trade school if that's something you did, but also informal education. I really feel that in the past 5 years for sure, the ability for people to gain informal education has really gotten easier. It's become better because of the internet. Udemy, YouTube, Education to Go, these services that provide an opportunity to learn. With libraries, we've always had the ability to get self-help books or how-to books, these things. The idea of learning something and lifelong learners, that's always existed. I just think it's gotten easier. So use the education. Work experience, what did somebody do during their working years? If they're currently working, what have they done in the past? What's their current position teaching them? How can that be used to be an effective volunteer? Kind of the traditional sense, but what you'll see is if you use these three factors and worry less about the skills, so don't check off box after box of, oh, I have this skill, I have this skill. Say, where'd you work? How long were you there? What did you do? Focus on the education. What courses did you take? Get specific. What courses did you take? What did you learn in those courses? And then the final piece, mental health. And the mental health is the one that really needs some description here, because traditionally in the psychological sciences, in the psychiatric realm, mental health essentially means that you are mentally ill, that you have a diagnosed mental illness. And that's in the medical world. Now, if you go to the dictionary, it's going to talk about day-to-day, which is a little closer to where I fall. My ideas of mental health basically say, what helps you be you on a day-to-day basis? What do you have to do? And this goes back to habits and attitudes. What do you have to do for your habits and attitudes? And more importantly, and through my research, this has kind of been found, what are 3 to 5 things that you do every day that help you stay who you are? An example, as I went through research interviews, through a couple of different studies, formal studies that I've done, I had older women in the first study and then younger women in the second study say that one of the things they did every day is a crossword puzzle. It might be a crossword puzzle. It might be a 5-mile bike ride. It might be an hour in the pool doing laps in the mornings. It might be attending a coffee group every morning. It might be listening to a podcast on the way to work. But what is those 3 to 5 things, like I said, that help you remain you? And I think by a nonprofit focusing on these elements, or as an individual, if you're an AmeriCorps State member or if you're a Vista member, recruiting volunteers to help with a project, looking at these factors specifically, because what you'll find is when we look at retention, volunteers that are recruited only on skills, you're not looking at the whole person. And so through these 3 factors, we can actually point to positions that volunteer may not even know that they have an interest in. Through my AmeriCorps Vista service, I have discovered that my technological skills that I do have a passion for are actually stronger than I thought they were, because I've dug back to my past education, my past work experience, my mental health, because I realized how happy it made me when I was younger, first learning to write HTML, when I was a high school student as a technology coordinator for a real estate firm, how happy I was creating and problem solving, and I was doing it through technology. So let's talk now about the screening and interviewing processes. So when we look at screening and interviewing, we're going to have an application, application questions. These are going to talk about your name, address, email, all that stuff. But then we're going to get really specific. We're going to talk about your education. Where did you go to school? City, state, zip, all that good stuff. What was your major? And then what courses did you take? What was in that major? Because a communications major at Graceland University, a communications major at Iowa State University, a communications major at Arizona State University, a communications major at Regis University, they're going to be different. They might be titled the same. They're going to be different. So what are those? And then we're going to talk about mental health. What makes you happy? What do you do on a daily basis? And that can help with the future, which is the recognition, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So then we're going to want references. References can tell a lot, and this is the same deal. Let's look at maybe some references from the education and the work. And I know that in some cases, people say personal references aren't worth a whole lot, but I think in a volunteer setting they really are, especially if you have somebody that has maybe done some non-traditional volunteering, which I don't think gets some of the credit that it should. And then obviously we're going to have an interview, and in that interview we want to talk about these 3 elements for sure. And a volunteer interview really is like a job interview in a lot of ways. But what I like about volunteer interviews, and in the volunteer interviewing that I've done for various volunteer positions, is I like what I'll call a prove-it story, like you might use in a traditional job interview, where you're asked a question about, tell me about a time that you had a challenge, and then somebody tells you a short story to prove that they've done something. I like that in a volunteer interview. I want that in a volunteer interview, but I also want people, especially when it comes to the mental health piece and especially with happiness, I want them to kind of go a little more narrative in that area. So you've got somebody recruited. It's time to train them. You're going to do introductions. They're going to come in and they're going to meet everybody in the organization. They're going to meet from the janitor to the executive director to the board president. This is important, regardless of how they're going to interact with the organization. I think it's important for a volunteer to understand the organization. Now, if the organization's massive, if there's 500 people in the organization, they're not going to meet everybody. But meeting individuals at all levels is really important, because I think it helps people feel more of a community and more of a connection. Uh, and then organizational background, understanding why the organization exists, how the organization started, what have been the driving factors behind the organization's success and the programs. And then obviously we're going to get position specific. We're going to talk about the ins and outs of the position, and this is really a good opportunity to let the volunteer kind of do a needs analysis, for them to say, okay, you want this done, but I have these ideas. And I think it's really important for any nonprofit that wants to grow, or any nonprofit really, to be open to change, to say, yes, we're open to the ideas of our volunteers. How can we do things different? How can we do things better? All these things help with retaining volunteers. And retention can be a big problem for some organizations. So this one is this is so obvious, but so many people forget it, and that is a simple thank you. At the end of the day, every day, if you can, a simple thank you for your time. You are appreciated. That is the number one thing that can keep a volunteer coming back, regardless of age. And then understanding how they're appreciated. There's a book. It's called The 5 Love Languages, that talks about how husbands and wives can know each other better and get along better. But out of that grew appreciation languages. So to understand how somebody's appreciated, if they're appreciated by spending time together, so that might be having lunch together, or taking breaks together, or even sharing a workspace. Appreciation by gifts. Do they, would putting a box of chocolates on their desk once a week or at random show that they are appreciated? So understand how they are appreciated. And the last one is just don't give them something they don't want. And this one, I really struggled with this when I learned this. The number one thing, and at this point, if this was a live audience, I'd be asking, what is the number one thing that volunteers don't want? And time after time, and this has been this way ever since I've been involved in nonprofits, everybody thinks that volunteer receptions and recognition events are a big deal and that everybody should do them. And from my experience and the research that I've done, is it's actually the last thing you want to do. It's good publicity for the organization. That's great. That's fine. But overall, volunteers do not want it. They do not feel that individual appreciation. Yeah, you might hand them a certificate thing and hang on the wall, and there might be their picture in the paper and this kind of thing. But overall, it's not giving them that appreciation for why they are there. So understand your volunteers, and if you have a bunch of volunteers that say, hey, yeah, once a year we want to have some big shindig get together and dinner and awards, and but I'm going to be very surprised if a lot of folks have volunteers that say that. All right, so questions. This is a recorded presentation, but I want questions, and so put them in the comments, and I'll read the comments, and or send me an email or give me a call. Here is my contact information, and I'll be happy to have a conversation with you or give you the information you need. Thank you so much. Very much appreciated for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.